So, when I was younger, one show that I frequently watched was Total Drama. In fact, it's a show that I watched so frequently, to the point where, to be honest, I ended up quoting the show a lot. There would even be times where it actually ended up being something that I was hyperfixated with whenever a new season was ongoing. But when the season comes to an end, that hyperfixation would end up fizzling out for a while since the season was over, but when a new season would come out, I'd basically come back for it because of how good the show was. I wouldn't say that Total Drama is my favorite Canadian cartoon. I mean, Ed, Edd n Eddy and MLPFIM are the goats of good Canadian cartoons. But in a sea of tons of shows that makes the country's catalog of animation look bad, Total Drama always stood out to me for its unique plot structure, which is basically Survivor except it's animated, and its character dynamics, which always gave the show a suspenseful tone, where you don't know who's actually going to be eliminated next until you actually watch the next episode. The first 3 seasons, and Revenge of the Island by extension, are the show in its peak. Granted, season 2 had an issue where they padded things out because they didn't have enough characters to have them be eliminated in every episode, so a lot of the episodes just came across as being filler, and season 3 had the generic love triangle that is often the most hated aspect in any animated series, but the show has not been able to get up to the standards of these first few seasons since then, because the less said about All-Stars and Pockettail Island, the better. Though, at least the Redonkulous race was pretty good. So, what's the next logical step for this franchise that went through a bit of a downward spiral for a tiny bit, and then bounced back briefly? Oh, that's easy. Age the characters down, put them in a daycare, and turn the show into an episodic comedy. Wait, what? Yeah, today's subject is Total DramaRama. Say, you know those cartoons from the 1980s to the 2000s that age cartoon characters down, and they made an entire show about that? Well, let's bring that idea back, while also incorporating a lot of the bad aspects from the spin-offs slash reboots that were coming out on Cartoon Network in the mid to late 2010s. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what went wrong is that this show is in the exact same category as a lot of these shows. Now, getting this out of the way, no, this show is not as bad as either Powerpuff Girls 2016 or Thundercats Roar, because in some respects, Total DramaRama does have sprinkles of highlights here and there, and of these 5 shows, Total DramaRama is probably the least offensive out of all of them. Though, I've only seen a few episodes of Ben 10 2017, and that show's problem is the art style being a turnoff, and for a show that wants to be cartoony, it feels way too restrained most of the time. Total DramaRama is not annoying, nor does it feel try-hard or have alarming content in it most of the time, but this show does have a specific set of problems that basically makes this Total Drama's equivalent to Teen Titans Go and those other reboots. The first of this show's problems is that there's mostly no purpose for this show to exist at all. Now, unlike Powerpuff Girls 2016, I can give this show some slack where it feels like it's trying to have its own identity, and the show doesn't feel like it's spitting all over the original, basically being in a similar vein as Teen Titans Go, where this show is obviously set in a different continuity, where the characters did meet each other at a younger age, even though this show in specific decides to reference modern technology and directly mentions the current decade that we're in, the 2020s, which is gonna date this show horribly. No, my problem instead is that the show is utterly pointless. What was the point of taking all of these characters and putting them in a daycare exactly? What is there to really do with these characters now that you basically age them back? Here's your answer. Absolutely nothing. You could literally replace all of the characters in this show with the cast of any other, and nothing would change at all. And that's been proven to have been the case as well. You remember Baby Looney Tunes? Well, that's exactly what Total DramaRama is like. It's almost eerie how similar that both of these two shows are. Both of them take the main cast of a specific franchise and age them down. Both of them have one of the franchise's iconic adults looking after them, and both of them strip the identity of the franchise that they're a part of in order to appeal to the lowest common denominator. And that's really saying something, because fun fact, Baby Looney Tunes actually turned me away from Looney Tunes for a while because of how much I remember not liking that show even when I was younger, because of how dull and boring it was. And to be honest, that's exactly how Total DramaRama is like as well, plus with the addition of Gross Out and the try-hard comedy of these 2010s Cartoon Network reboots. I honestly had to take back what I said about Camp Coral being the third most boring show that I reviewed so far, because as much as I really did did not like that show for a lot of the same reasons as to why I don't like this show. Camp Coral, you can see the potential in a show like it working. The show's comedy fell flat, but they tried to do things. With Total DramaRama, aside from the novelty of it being an episodic kind of show, what else is there in this show to really justify its existence? It's like this show was done as an apology for the last few seasons of Total Drama due to how utterly massacred the characters were in All-Stars, and how the other characters got pushed to the side after World Tour, while at the exact same time, they had to find an excuse to make the weird stuff not feel out of place because of how much of a train wreck that Pocketail Island was. And while the apology is appreciated, them trying to incorporate these elements into the show doesn't mean that the show is automatically saved. This show has a lot of slapstick jokes where the characters get hurt by something, so this show seems to be trying to go for that approach. But the problem there is that the slapstick in this show falls flat because the show uses the exact same flash animation from the original series, and they didn't even bother to give the show an upgrade to fit the style that the show apparently wants to go for. And it shares a similar problem as Tom and Jerry Kids. Slapstick doesn't really work whenever the target of the slapstick is a child. I mean, it's funny when the character is an adult because their minds are more developed and they are more physically capable, but when it happens to a child, it makes it a lot more difficult to watch. And it also makes it more cruel when it happens to them than if it happens to a character like Squidward Tentacles. Seriously, watching Bridget being miserable while she has hiccups, all because she drank soda, while also being under the impression that her mother was gonna send her away is just cruel. Like, if it's karma because she drank pop, which is not allowed to be for kids at that specific age, it's not really deserved here because Bridget got permission from Chef to drink it. And not only that, Chef basically rushed her to drink the whole thing. And they also did her dirty in the last regular episode of the series, basically saying that she's just a background character, despite her appearance in the show's intro. And also, by that logic, characters like Lashana are background characters because she doesn't appear in every episode either. And the show often ignores a large amount of the main cast in every episode, not even giving them a non-speaking role, which ends up becoming incredibly noticeable because all of them appear in the show's intro. Also, this show seems to have a serious vendetta against Cody that gets to be excessive after a while, and the other characters seem to have a low opinion of him as well. If Powerpuff Girls 2016's joke that they ran into the ground was the characters getting the villain's name wrong, this show's joke that they run into the ground is its poor treatment of Cody, to the point where this show straight up states out loud that Cody is an alien from another planet, which is blatantly untrue. The audition tape for Island even proves that. So them blatantly saying that Cody is an alien out loud is just an excuse that the show has to dunk on him some more. Also, Cody barely has a reaction to anything that happens to him, like, at all, whereas in the original show, he has a wide range of emotions. And that's actually one of the show's biggest problems. Because this show basically decided to strip the franchise of its identity and dumbed it down so that they could make the show appeal to a younger audience, the characters either got hit hard and flanderized, or they just became generic archetypes. For example, Owen was the character that liked to eat in the original show, but the show gave him several other traits to balance things out, plus his relationship with Izzy and Noah gave him character development. But in this show, they just straight up made him the generic fat character that likes to eat stereotype with barely anything to make him stand out from the trope. And Duncan was a delinquent in the original show, but he also showed at many points in the series that he has a soft spot, regardless of whatever All-Stars was trying to make you believe about him. But this show turned him into a generic troublemaker, or basically just a knockoff Bart Simpson, and that's basically what they did with a lot of the other characters in this show too. Harold is the generic genius, Courtney is the generic control freak, Beth is basically a nose picker, Bridget is the generic nice girl, and Lashana is the generic sassy girl. Though a lot of these characters were already like this in the original show, except for Beth. I don't recall her doing a lot of what she did in this show in the original series. But some other characters are basically a lot more flanderized than the other. For instance, what on earth did you guys do to Gwen? Yes, in the original show, she was what you could describe as the goth girl, but that was not all that her character was about. She displayed emotions such as sadness, happiness, kindness, had empathy for other people around her, etc. And bear in mind, all of that was when she was older. Gwen in this show is a lot younger, and she says a lot of things that are just out of pocket in this show. Her very first appearance in this show has her making a comment about how there are many Crane-related deaths, and I'm just thinking to myself, that is not Gwen at all. They also made her super obsessed with characters getting hurt now, which is just so un-Gwen-like to do. Especially with her liking the fact that she was in small spaces, like her egg, despite the original show establishing that she has major claustrophobia. But believe it or not, Gwen is not even the character that they ruined the most. No, that goes to Chef. In the original show, Chef was admittedly underutilized in that he was just standing beside Chris for most of the show. Basically, take all of the problems that I had with Professor Utonium from Powerpuff Girls 2016 and apply those same problems to Chef. Chef went from being a menacing presence for the other characters to be around, to the point where he's actually scary whenever he gets mad, to an absolute idiot that breaks down very easily in every other episode. I can understand them not wanting Chef to be that harsh towards a bunch of toddlers because they are a bunch of toddlers, but the question is just unanswered. Why did they make Chef the daycare owner? Chris, I can understand them not making the daycare owner because he's just meant to be the host of the show and has done a ton of horrible stuff to the cast that I don't think that this man could even be legally able to take care of children. But like, you have other options that you could go with, like MacArthur, for example. She appears frequently throughout the show and even has a backstory where she's been fired from every job that she's been hired in, so this could have been what eventually got her job as the daycare teacher, because I really do not like what they did to Chef. He especially got intolerable in the finale special, where he directly enables Duncan's behavior throughout all 40 minutes of that special. And while MacArthur is an adult in this show, she absolutely didn't deserve to be ignored after she ended up accidentally breaking her back in an episode, and Chef really should have been more considerate towards her well-being, because she's the one who's been helping Chef whenever something goes wrong at the daycare. And much like Teen Titans Go, Powerpuff Girls 2016, Ben 10 2017, and Thundercats Roar, if you have no knowledge of who any of these characters are, you are gonna be totally lost, because the very first episode of this show does not introduce any of its characters to the audience, which is strange because they did that for Sugar and Lightning later on in the series, but I don't see the point in introducing them that late into the show, because both of them have existed long before this show even came into existence. And while Revenge of the Island was not the most beloved season of the show, the characters introduced there were memorable. And if I'm being honest, they probably should have added a few of them into this show before it even came out, like Mike, Zoe, Brick, Dawn, Sam, Dakota, and Cameron. Although, out of all characters that you could have introduced into this show, why Sugar exactly? Sugar was a character that was very hated in Pocketail Island. Heck, I didn't even like her when the show initially premiered. Not only was Sugar annoying, but she was basically just Owen, but without any of the likability whatsoever, and she's not any better in DramaRama. She legit tries to get her group put in danger during the 40-minute special, but as for the first portion of the series, if you jumped into even the first episode of the show, you will not know what's going on, or who the characters' names are. And considering the fact that this show came out in 2018, most kids around that time period would be too young to know what Total Drama is, and those that probably did know about its existence probably weren't even allowed to watch it because of how risky that the show often got, especially in the first season of the show. This show decides to throw us in, expecting us to know about them, and that's a major problem with turning a story-based show into an episodic comedy. And I could tell that this was probably Cartoon Network's doing, because that was a problem that plagued the original show. Certain characters were not allowed to stay in a relationship because it's not realistic for its demographic to learn, which is what led to the infamous love triangle arc in World Tour. And a lot of the problems that this show has feels right at home in the era that the show was made in, along with TTG, PPG 2016, Ben 10 2017, and Thundercats Roar, complete with flanderizing beloved characters and dumbing it down for its audience. But I think that the reason why this show doesn't get talked about that much in comparison to those other shows, because at its worst, the biggest problems that Total DramaRama has is that it's just forgettable, pointless, and boring at worst. With the exception of Total Eclipse of the Fart. That episode is just abysmal. Rule of thumb, don't make an episode that implies that a grown adult likes to go go around and smell other people's farts, and don't emphasize the fact that he likes to smell the farts of children. That just opens up a whole can of worms to the point where this episode rivals the worst episodes of Powerpuff Girls 2016. The episode really is that bad, but aside from all of that, DramaRama is the least offensive out of all of these shows, because believe it or not, there are some positives I do have with it. I can definitely see why they'd want to make Drama into an episodic show, because whenever each season of the original series were to end, the hype would freeze for a little bit until the next season would come, and the characters were what made the original series as good as it was. And to be honest, there are some episodes that have this work in their favor. The episode where Duncan befriends a caveman was strangely wholesome, and weirdly enough, this is the first whole drama thing ever that has a Christmas plotline. Also, I do think that it was for the best to have this show be in an alternate continuity, given that this show does get very weird, as opposed to the original show, which mostly had its things and animals act all realistic. It was also fun to spot all of the Easter eggs that were from the original show. Also, I like that they retained Owen and Noah's friendship from World Tour, and Izzy is as unhinged and hilarious as she was in the original. So the only people that I'd really recommend this show to are people who want a more episodic version of Total Drama. That is, if you can make it past the intro of this show. Yeah, that's another thing that I should point out. The theme song for this show is absolutely horrible. I don't usually talk about the theme song in a show that I'd review, unless I point out if it's catchy or is missing a lot of context explaining what the show is about, but this show is the one exception. Its theme song and background music are literally tied with the theme song and background music of the Tom and Jerry comedy show as some of the worst music in a show that I reviewed so far. I understand that I Wanna Be Famous or some of the iconic music tracks from the original show were gonna be hard to match, but this show didn't even try. Who thought that it was a good idea to have most of your music tracks composed of children screeching at the top of their lungs and chanting in the background? Yes, I understand that the characters in this show are children going to a daycare, but a pup named Scooby-Doo didn't do this. Heck, Tom and Jerry Kids had a great theme song. Not even Baby Looney Tunes had this problem, as overly saccharine as that show's theme song was. This show starts off with the choir of shrieking children singing a song that literally sounds like circus music, and on top of that, showcasing literal nonsense, and then finally showcasing the title of the show. Though, between listening to a song that has off-key instruments and a song where children are shrieking at the top of their lungs, I honestly don't know which one is worse, to be honest. But needless to say, I wouldn't be surprised if the theme song and background music were enough to turn people away from this show entirely because of how annoying and ear-grating it is. And also, the special that was done months after the show ended was just terrible, with a very convoluted plot, a story that was entirely pointless because Duncan made the water park disappear, Chef being at his absolute worst, and Duncan in this is entirely reminiscent to how he was in All Stars, being completely insecure about being called the nice guy until he does something bad to prove that he's not a hero. So overall, Total Drama is pretty bad. I don't think that this show is like top 5 material. Heck, I don't know if this show would even make the top 10. Even All Stars and Pockatail Island are worse than a majority of this show because of the character derailment and jumping the shark regarding the show's down-to-earth elements. But being better than something that is worse doesn't mean that it's good. And that's exactly how I feel towards DramaRama. The show is boring, the characters have been reduced to generic archetypes, it's not funny, the theme song and background music are awful, and fits both sides of the coin in being one of those aged-down incarnations and Cartoon Network spin-offs / reboots. Also, why is Jude from 16 in this show? So, recently, I watched Gabby's Dollhouse the movie with a few friends of mine, and by recently, I mean September 24th, 2025. Given that this review won't be out for a while, especially since October is looking to be a very packed month for my videos, so by the time you're seeing this video, this movie will probably already be out on digital due to a recent thing that companies have been doing, where they'd release the film on digital after only a few weeks. So, I'm still going to label this this as a Sean's Thoughts review anyway, due to the script being done while the movie is still in theaters. And I'm gonna cut to the chase on this movie. This film is awful. I thought that this would just be a regular kind of bad, similar to what my thoughts were on the Lilo and Stitch remake or Smurfs 2025, where they were incredibly soulless products, but not quite cracking the top 10 worst animated movies reviewed for Sean's yearly reviews. But no, getting this right out of my system, Gabby's Dollhouse is the worst movie that I've seen in 2025, and is a very high contender for one of the worst movies that I reviewed, period. And I know that this might come off as a bit shocking to you, especially considering the fact that most preschool shows are relatively harmless, with a few certain exceptions. Heck, I don't even consider Little Brown Bear to be that bad, to be honest. How could a movie that is based off of a preschool show by DreamWorks themselves be so horrendous? I mean, after all, according to a lot of people who are against discourse surrounding any type of media, the film is meant for a younger demographic, so it can't be that bad, right? Ignoring the fact that, the obvious answer to that is that the movie actually is that bad for reasons that I'll be getting to in a little bit. And second, something being for a specific demographic does not exempt it from receiving criticism in any way whatsoever. Like, there are things that being for a specific demographic can excuse. Like, for example, in this movie, Gabby frequently breaks the fourth wall, talking to the children in the audience, thinking that they'll answer her questions. I mean, if this movie wants to be a movie for toddlers, I can really care less. Where the criticisms will have to come in, though, is if they do things that could cause legitimate harm to a child, like Caillou saying that throwing tantrums will get you what you want, or the entire existence of Cocomelon, which just exists to overstimulate a child's mind, which lessens their attention span. And in the context of this movie, the rest of this review will be judging the film based on what it does as a movie itself. Because in spite of the fact that it's a movie that is specifically made for toddlers, it actually wants you to take whatever it's saying seriously, and as such, because the movie wants to take itself seriously, I have to take whatever this movie's saying as seriously as possible. And where I can truly start tearing into regarding this movie is its tone. The writing is absolutely terrible in this movie, where the movie just wastes its time on pointless action sequences, as well as having plot contrivances, one of which, wouldn't have happened if Blue Cat just patiently waited in the dollhouse while Gabby was inside. And basically being a typical fetch quest, where Gabby has to go around and find each one of her toy friends. But what's even worse than that, is that the stakes are incredibly low in this movie. You know how a lot of people have pointed out how in the SpongeBob episode, Back to the Past, where the episode becomes all serious before suddenly throwing in a bunch of hilarious jokes with Patrick causing the conflict to happen, and an ending where a bunch of SpongeBob and Patricks drop in, or an Ice Age collision course, where the threat of a meteor colliding with the Earth isn't taken seriously at all. Not only is that basically what this movie does, but that's all that this movie does. Not a single character in this movie take the threat of this woman named Vera seeing them move around remotely serious in the slightest. The movie is constantly cracking jokes at the worst possible moments, which removes tension. And this isn't even a problem that you could blame on the film's demographic, this is basic writing. The 2017 MLP movie, which was aimed towards the same demographic by the way, may have been lighthearted in certain sequences as well, but that movie at least knew when the time was right to do this, which made the moments where the characters were actually in danger a lot more suspenseful. And ironically enough, that movie also has a sequence where the characters are underwater and turn into mermaids. But to that film's credit, because the main six and the hippogriffs were underwater where nobody could see them, there's no urgency to really get out of there immediately. This film shows a wide shot of what this fish tank looks like, and they decide to do a song number right out in the open where Vera could see them if she was paying attention to the fish tank. And they just casually roam around in her house without the looming threat of her potentially finding out that Gabby and the other toys can move around. Which is the second big problem with this movie. The world building is all over the place. I understand that this is a movie that is based off of an animated series from DreamWorks, so there's going to be some things from the show that are left out if you jump into the movie, but an animated film's job is to fill you in on who the characters are, especially if said movie was released in theaters. There's no explanation about how the magic from the cat ears work, nor is there an explanation as to how this universe operates, because according According to the beginning of the film, which was an origin story for Gabby, but not really, Gabby's grandmother gave her the dollhouse, but that doesn't explain anything. The grandmother just gave Gabby these cat ears before we then cut to her as an adult or something.
The actress is 17, so I don't know how old she is in this movie.
But everything else goes unmentioned, such as the fact that the town that Gabby and her grandmother go to has a traffic light that is in the shape of a cat. And the film is incredibly selective on whether or not it wants a specific background character to know that the toys are alive or not. At the beginning, it's stated that only those who wear the cat ears can see the toys, but then it's shown at other points in the movie that those who don't wear the cat ears can see them move, especially with Vera later on in the film, where she can see that Chumsley is moving around for no reason. The movie doesn't acknowledge if this is all part of her imagination or not. The movie really is that incompetent that it decides to lump in having an imagination with seeing them being real. Do you want to know what made the Toy Story films as good as they were? They acknowledged that the toys are not supposed to move while humans were present. This movie doesn't know whether it wants the toys to be kept a secret or not. Not even Vera has a consistent reaction to this, because she acknowledged at one point in the film that she saw Gabby running around, but yet she acted surprised that the toys suddenly disappeared. And speaking of which, now we get into the worst aspect of the film, and this is what solidified this film as being downright awful. But you may have also remembered in the surprising spoiler that I dropped, in that this movie is in my bottom 10 for all of Sean's yearly reviews. Yes, I think that this film is worse than Brave in the Wild. Now, Gabby's Dollhouse the movie, on the surface of things, shouldn't be that bad, right? It's a movie made for toddlers that is clearly meant to be aimed at that specific demographic, which could honestly explain why this movie is so sickly sweet and saccharine. But no, this movie is offensively bad, just because of what they pulled near the ending of this movie alone. The movie was already doing badly even before this point, because of a major problem that this movie has, where the plot is driven solely off of plot contrivances, where the conflict of this movie happens because of Blue Cat, and all of Gabby's toys are split apart from each other because of him, and he doesn't even seem to care throughout the film, and the movie is overloaded with filler, where we waste time in the fish tank doing a song number, and there's a chase scene with the tribe that didn't need to happen, where all of it didn't need to happen if one of the other toys just told the tribe that she's with Gabby and the rest of them. But what makes this movie offensively bad is that this movie decides to pull a redemption arc with one of its villains. Where do I even begin with this? Okay, so this movie has a villain that we are supposed to feel sympathy for. This guy named Chumsley is this plush cat that Vera decided to store away in her desk drawer. Basically, he's a character who has abandonment issues, a lot like Spinell from Steven Universe or the Collector from the Owl House. There's no issue here, right? That's where you're wrong. How could I describe Chumsley in the best way I could? So, take Lotso from Toy Story 3, a character that was meant to be evil all the time, and we are not supposed to feel sorry for, despite the fact that he also has a story where he was abandoned by his owner, and we're not supposed to feel sorry for him, mainly because he decided to run a daycare center like a dictatorship, basically taking out his anger of being replaced on those who did nothing wrong. Now, take all of those traits from Lotso and apply them to Chumsley. Only difference being that Chumsley isn't a tyrant, but we're supposed to feel sorry for him for his other bad qualities. But no, I'm sorry. The film immediately made me lose all sympathy for him as soon as he did the following things. He made a total mess in the dollhouse thanks to Blue Cat letting him in.
And Blue Cat doesn't even get scolded at or punished for doing any of what he pulled throughout the film.
And then later on, when Chumsley decides to tell his tragic backstory to Gabby as a way to guilt trip her into thinking that she's like Vera, when all she was asking Chumsley to do was to stop causing these messes to happen. And then he decides to kick all of them out of the dollhouse before proceeding to tell all of them about Gabby potentially growing up and losing interest in the dollhouse, causing Gabby to cry before she runs out of the dollhouse while sobbing. Because what Chumsley is doing in these sequences is that he's taking his abandonment issues out on Gabby, specifically to guilt her into laying off of him while he continues to cause a mess in the dollhouse, which doesn't even belong to him, by the way. And in spite of the fact that Chumsley decided to do all of this, the movie decides to give him exactly exactly what he wants in the end. Not even so much as giving him a punishment for what he did, or him even apologizing to Gabby for pulling this stuff in the first place. Because apparently, it worked so well when Raya and the Last Dragon decided to do this with Namari, and while the message in this movie doesn't make me as angry as the message from Ivan the Incredible or Raya and the Last Dragon did, because those movies could do legitimate harm to you if you took whatever they said seriously, Gabby's Dollhouse the movie has a very poorly executed and downright incompetent message that is very damaging regardless of if other movies have worse messages. To give this movie the benefit of the doubt, what it's trying to go for is the "you don't have to let go of things that are perceived as childish because you grew up" message. The kind that you'd find in movies that I'd rather be watching than this, like the SpongeBob SquarePants movie. But in execution, what the film is actually saying is that you should just not grow up at all. You should keep holding on to those childish imaginations into your mind for your entire life, even though people like Chris Chan showed what it would be like if certain adults decide not to grow up.
So yeah, please, get everything off of the internet now, 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 now!
And it's also doing this with Vera, who I gotta say, is one of the most normal people in this movie, but is treated like Al from Toy Story 2, basically being treated as the butt of the joke in nearly every scene she appears in. But in Toy Story 2, Al deserved it, because at the beginning of the movie, he steals Woody directly from Andy's mom, who told him that Woody is not for sale. In this movie, though, Vera didn't realize that she was stealing the dollhouse from Gabby. She assumed that it was for sale when it parked up to a yard sale, and she paid for it fair and square, and yet she's treated like a butt monkey in the movie anyway. Because later on in the movie, these doll scouts basically go up to her house and basically badger her into giving them the dollhouse before they all proceed to break into her house in an attempt to steal it from her. Are you sure that these scouts were not supposed to be intended as the real villains? Because breaking into someone's house to take something from them is a crime! And then the film has the audacity to get onto Vera for simply moving on with her life, and she didn't even abandon Chumsley either. All she did in the film was store him away in a drawer. It's not like she donated him, like what happened to Jessie from Toy Story 2. It's just that because of the fact that Vera got too busy with real-life responsibilities, she had to put him to the side for a while. And all I was thinking about while watching the film was, just leave him in the candy world to wallow in his own pettiness. After everything that Chumsley pulled throughout the movie, him getting Vera to pay attention to him ever again is the last thing he deserves, because you don't reward someone with bad behavior. That's a horrible lesson to teach kids. And like I stated before, because this movie is teaching this lesson unironically, I have to judge this movie taking it as seriously as possible. And these moments in the movie alone are what bumped this movie down from a 3 out of 10 to a 2 out of 10. Because to give the other 2025 movies I reviewed the slightest amount of credit, they were bad as movies that were connected to the franchise that they were a part of. Lilo and Stitch 2025 had the vibes of those behind the movie hating the original Lilo and Stitch movie. And Spurs 2025 is a soulless cash grab that was made as an excuse to make hit songs. Gabby's Dollhouse is an insult to your intelligence, and quality-wise, it's right up there with Raya and the Last Dragon. But to give that film some credit, without Namari or its message, the film would have been just mediocre at worst, which is why I gave that film a 3 out of 10, as opposed to being a movie that was already bad and was made worse by Chumsley and its message. As for Sean's yearly reviews, just because of what this movie decided to pull near the end, it is in my bottom 10 for sure. The Wild may be more annoying, and Brave may be more draining, but this movie is downright damaging, and is without a doubt in my top 5 worst movies I reviewed for Sean's yearly review. Oh wait, I almost forgot. I saw another movie that sank lower than this film, so yeah. Ryan's World the Movie Titan Universe Adventure is a 2024 live-action animation hybrid movie that is based on a YouTube series named Ryan's World, that, getting this right out of my system, is absolutely awful. This review comes to me as a request from my new editor, Matthew the Prep, who previously worked on my Raya and the Last Dragon review. One day he asked me if I do watch-alongs with other people, which I said that I occasionally do, given that I did that when I did my review on the Rodfellows movie, and I did that with the previous review in production order, the Gabby's Dollhouse movie. Well, Matthew the Prep requested me to do a review on the Ryan's World movie, and in just 1 week alone from the time that I watched and am scripting this review in particular, I've come across 2 movies in a row that are currently in my bottom 10 for this series. And the scariest part of all is that I'm only 46 episodes into this series so far. I'm not looking forward to what the future has in store. So, what is the premise of this movie? This film revolves around a kid named Ryan. He's so much of a star on YouTube that he gets too occupied with all of that to be able to play with his sisters. So what they do in the movie is that they decide to mess with his things in order to get him to snap and finally play with them for once. Before we go into this animated world, where do we just fumble around before defeating one of the worst twist villains ever? Blah blah blah, message about appreciating family that is poorly executed, blah blah blah, filler. And to start off this review, this film is just like the Rodfellows movie, where that film was shrouded in so much controversy regarding what the people behind that movie, Dan P. Lyons, Darren A. Nichols, and Alexander V. A. Mortensen did, that's now what the movie is most well known for, even though the film itself was just awful. Ryan's World the movie has this exact same problem with itself, only difference being that nothing predatory was going on, but instead, this is in regards to Ryan being exploited by his parents. Because according to Matthew the Prep, the kid was 12 years old,
Now 13 as of this script being drafted.
and in middle school at the time that the film was made, and the channel was formed in 2015 when he was 4 years old, which by the time of the film having been released, the channel was 9 years old. People online have been clamoring for Ryan's parents to stop exploiting him, from other online animation critics like Saberspark,
Before all the nasty stuff regarding him came forward,
which have been debunked, to channels like Internet Anarchist. And it's quite alarming when things like that occur. Have we not learned anything from the Quiet on Set documentary? Let kids live without being exploited by their parents for their financial gain. But even without the knowledge of what's been happening with Ryan and what he's been having to go through behind the scenes, this movie would still be awful, because to begin with my criticisms, let's start off with the production values. Keep this in the back of your heads for this entire video. This film was somehow able to be given a theatrical release, and from the sound of this, I am just floored. Like, there are movies out there that do match the same exact quality as a straight-to-DVD movie that somehow managed to get into theaters, such as Norma the North or Arctic Dogs, but this movie is literally the bottom of the barrel in this regard, because every aspect of this movie just screams cheap, right down to the poster. This looks like something that you'd make in Photoshop with built-in assets. It's so amateurish and is something that you'd expect from someone in a graphic design class, not from something that is able to be given a full release, but beauty is only skin deep. It can't be that bad for the rest of the movie, right?
Wrong!
The rest of the movie is not much better, because the cinematography makes the film look like one of those YouTube videos that acted as full-blown home movies. I mean, this film is based off of a YouTube channel after all, so being authentic is what you get. Despite the fact that, again, this thing was able to be given a theatrical release. There had to be some form of quality control. Surely they must have had to work with a budget that gave them access to more high-quality equipment, because a problem with the cinematography in this movie is that it's too bright. Not to mention either, this legit looks like it belongs in a YouTube video. But even that's an insult to YouTube videos, because I've seen YouTube videos that had better effects than whatever this movie tries to pull off. Just look at this video made by StormXF3.
Why did you smash my cake?
And then compare it to one of the visual effects from this movie, and you'll see the big problem with this movie's effects. And while the animated portions are the best aspect of this movie, making me think that they should have had this movie be fully animated instead, but just because the animated portions are the best parts of the movie, that doesn't mean that they're great, because the animation in this movie is nothing special. The animation studio behind this film's animated segments is Shinny Animation, and their catalog is massive, having having worked on most notably the long-running Doraemon and Crayon Shin-chan animes. But yet, with this movie, it feels like they were not putting their all into this, as did none of the other supporting studios that assisted Shinny for this film, feeling like they were obligated to do it despite not wanting to. Because for starters, the character designs in a vacuum do look nice, as because this movie was done by Shinny, who have experiences when it comes to the previously mentioned animes, they are competently designed. And the backgrounds give off this comic book-like feel, which emphasizes how this world that Ryan gets teleported to in the movie is literally a comic book, but everything else in this movie is incredibly undercooked. You know how a lot of TV shows and movies, whenever they do a satire of anime, often portray it as being overly cheapified, making over-the-top facial expressions, having these symbols pop up over and over again, etc., but only they did it specifically in a joking manner, since not all anime is like this? That's what this movie does, but they do it unironically, because to start things off, the character designs in this movie are incredibly lazy. Not because they look low effort, but rather, the movie decides to copy and paste the exact same body type and apply it to one of the others, while also completely disregarding the fact that some of those characters are a lot older than the other. Ryan's two sisters, for instance, are around the exact same height as Ryan, despite the fact that they're younger than him, and the movie's twist villain Clark was shown earlier in the movie to be a lot older than Ryan and his two sisters, and with the anthropomorphic cat and panda characters, the movie implies that both of them are supposed to be adults, but the movie shows that they are also around the same size as Ryan and his two sisters. And I need to emphasize this again, this film's animated segments are coming from the exact same studio that did the animation in Doraemon, which was able to offer a variety of body types for all of its characters, depending on what age they are, or which animal they are, and the lip syncing is so bad in this movie.
Of course, a trapdoor to a dungeon. Man, this guy is predictable.
I could understand if the lip syncing is bad in this movie if the animated segments were originally dubbed in Japanese and the filmmakers only had Japanese audio to work with. A lot of early English dubs of anime have had this problem, but the difference here is that they had English audio to work with, so there's no excuse for the lip syncing to not match with what the characters are saying as much as they are in this movie. Oftentimes, a character would say something and there would be a delay where the animation is still having the lips move, despite the fact that they finish with their sentence. And the movie's trend of having bad effects doesn't end at the live action portions of the movie. Oftentimes, it feels like they're cutting corners on the action sequences by just covering the screen in this gray smoke, using it as an excuse to not show the impacts. And the jarring effects that clashes with the rest of the movie are insanely obvious, like the speech balloons, or this abysmal swirly CGI star effect that shows up at points in the movie. Also, the CGI lava is incredibly jarring, and the animation doesn't even have the decency to make it at least look like it was meant for theaters. The movie looks like it was intended for TV instead. But okay, the production values in this movie are bad, but if the rest of the film can make up for the awful production values and the animated segments that are at such low standards for Shinny, that's all that matters. So what about the writing? Well, the writing doesn't seem to fare any better. Much like with what I pointed out with Lewis and the Aliens, the Rodfellows movie, and Gabby's Dollhouse the movie, a large chunk of the film consists of its characters goofing around and doing nothing for most of the movie. I don't even think that some of this content would even reach 22 minutes if it was mostly cut down. The first portion of the film, when we get into the comic book world, consists of Ryan and the plot-mandated comic relief character named Stella wandering aimlessly in the mansion looking for Ryan's sisters, and when Ryan does find them, we get into this action sequence before Red Titan goes to his fortress, which is a volcano, to assist Big Bad,
which is a stupid villain name, might I add,
to enact his evil plan of making the volcano erupt by throwing Mentos into it, which is incredibly stupid because lava is nothing like pop at all. And while the film is incredibly busy wasting its time on absolutely nothing happening for most of the movie, there are things that they don't explain at all. Like, How did Clark get a hold of this magic comic book at all? The movie never acknowledged magic or fantasy elements being a factor at any point, and the entire reason for most of the plot happening is so undercooked as well. A lot like Escape from Planet Earth, this movie tries to go for a message of, ooh, this character needs to learn to appreciate other people in his family. Despite not showing him doing anything that even warrants this, Ryan's friend Aiden tells Ryan that he needs to apologize to his sister for what he said to them in a previous scene after they knowingly decided to go into Ryan's room while knowing that they're not allowed in there and messing up his things. I mean, you could argue that Ryan saying, I don't want to play with you two ever again, was going overboard. He had a justifiable reason to get mad at them because they messed up his room, not even caring about the fact that they were messing with his things in the first place. And their motivation for doing so was that Ryan was not playing with them, even though they already have each other to play with the other in the first place. But the movie is also not making Ryan very sympathetic or likable in the movie either, because at the beginning of this movie, when Ryan decided to perform this magic trick where he decides to cut his friend Dan Rhodes in half, he then goes into the house to get something that his sister took from him back. He basically leaves Dan there to suffer, leading Aiden to have to help him be put back together. And being someone who does get squeamish very easily, watching a real magic trick like this, not knowing if the person is going to accidentally do bodily harm to that person, just makes my skin crawl. But when Ryan and Aiden get to this comic book store, there's a sign that tells them that they shouldn't go in there, but they try to go in there anyway, which only proceeds to make Ryan look like an actual hypocrite when he ends up telling his sisters off for doing the exact same thing that he and Aiden were trying to do before they get caught. And the twist villain in this movie is so stupid. Apparently, Clark, the guy at the comic book store, was the villain this whole time, which makes zero sense at all because there was only one copy of this comic book that Ryan and Aiden found when they went into that room that they weren't allowed to go into, and his motivation for doing what he's been doing throughout this film was that his little sister started caring more about her iPad than him, and he blames Ryan as the reason as to why his sister stopped paying attention to him. But that's not Ryan's fault at all. The sister chose to watch Ryan's content. You should be blaming your parents as being the reason why your sister stopped paying attention to you, not Ryan himself. So overall, Ryan's World the movie is just awful. The film is terribly written, where the characters either have no motivation for what they do in the film or the film decides to not tell a story at all. The production values are incredibly cheap, making the film not feel like it was meant for a theatrical release, and the characters give me no reason to sympathize with them at all. And given the other stuff that happened behind the scenes, plus with Ryan's World having stagnated with its target demographic in favor of other channels like Cocomelon,
which is already bad enough,
it's no wonder why this film failed to make back its $10 million budget. It's just bad. Definitely bottom tier on the films I've seen so far. The only reason as to why this movie is not in the bottom 4, and not even at the bottom of the list, because my top 3 consists of films that are actually insulting, and the Rodfellas movie consists of disgusting content akin to those Spider-Man and Elsa videos, but still though. The best way to sum up this movie in general is that this movie is basically the closest that we've ever gotten to one of those YouTube content farm videos. Something that is soulless, cheap, meant to make a quick buck, etc. And again, this thing was able to be released in theaters. When looking hard at it, this is the kind of stuff that you'd see on a television movie. And even some of those films are better than this pile of garbage. Therefore, I am giving this movie a 2 out of 10, and it is placing at the bottom 5 for all of Sean's yearly reviews. Avoid this movie at all costs. A lot of people did that when this thing came out, and it bombed for a very good reason. And let's let it stay that way. And now, we've officially come across the game changer for all of animation going forward. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Released in 1988 and was produced by the man, the myth, and the legend, Steven Spielberg. And had the animation director be Richard Williams. Which, getting this right out of my system, is an easy contender for the top 10 for all of Sean's yearly reviews so far. And how could it not be? It is only one of the most revolutionary animated animated movies of all time, responsible for the Disney Renaissance and the industry's new interest in animation, leading into the Renaissance era of the 90s, even if they did rely a bit much on the musical aspect and the gross-out slapstick trend. And even looking past the fact that this movie was the game changer for the industry, this movie stands well on its own, enough for Disney themselves to want to make a Roger Rabbit series themselves, but they couldn't get the rights to Roger Rabbit themselves, so they ended up having to settle for Bonkers, which we all know turned out so great. But that'll be a Sean's Network Reviews episode for another day. What's the plot of this movie? This movie revolves around a detective named Eddie Valiant. He has a grudge against Toons because of what happened to his brother, but he has to put that grudge to the side because the aptly named Roger Rabbit gets framed as a murderer, and with the help of Eddie, he needs to prove that Roger is actually innocent. That way Roger won't end up getting dunked in the dip, which basically kills Toons, leaving no trace of them behind. The first thing to note about this movie is that the animation is absolutely incredible. The animation in this movie, fun fact, was directed by Richard Williams, who you may know as the guy who spent most of his life working on The Thief and the Cobbler before that ended up getting taken away from him and ruined. Richard Williams was a perfectionist, and it certainly paid off here. The way that this movie blends the cartoon characters into the backgrounds is absolutely phenomenal. It almost looks like the characters are actually there with everyone else, and there were several obstacles that they had to jump through in order to get everything right, which could have ended up resulting in it looking incredibly obvious. Like the sequences where Roger Rabbit ends up trying to hide in Eddie's shirt, or when Eddie hides Roger Rabbit in a kitchen sink. And in any other live-action / animation hybrid movie, the sequences where Eddie goes into Toontown might have ended up looking insanely obvious because of the green screen and trying to impose him in these backgrounds, like what happened in the ending of a movie like Rockadoodle, but they thankfully managed to integrate him into the backgrounds of the cartoon world very nicely, that it makes it feel like he's actually in that world. And all while this movie incorporates the stellar animation, it also has an engaging story to go along with it. Despite the fact that this movie is rated PG, this movie is able to get away with a lot of adult jokes and moments that get particularly dark, and in all honesty, it makes this movie more mature than most adult cartoons nowadays, in that they don't just have crass and vulgar humor, as well as having something shocking happening just because it's an adult cartoon. In fact, having this kind of stuff happen actually makes them more immature as a result, because they expect you to laugh at these moments when they happen, inherently because it's shocking and vulgar. Roger Rabbit's maturity comes from its subtlety. The movie doesn't just shove vulgar humor in your face, it slowly makes its presence known with the characters occasionally swearing, and Jessica Rabbit's appearance in general, who is one of the most lovely characters that have ever been drawn, as well as some of the movie's more adult innuendos. There's literally a sequence where Eddie's girlfriend thinks that he's cheating on her with Jessica Rabbit, and the movie is also not afraid to get very dark as well. The sequences with Judge Doom are absolute nightmare fuel. Everyone knows about the iconic, "Remember me, Eddie, when I killed your brother? I talked! Yes, I talked!" And not just that, but something that Roger Rabbit does better than other movies of its kind is that, well, yes, the movie has several references to cartoon characters of the past. It's not trying to shove it in your face, making the priority being solely on the references rather than telling an actual story. Roger Rabbit has a perfect balance between telling the story about a detective and the use of references. Heck, this is the only time where you'll ever see Bugs Bunny and Mickey Mouse interact with each other, but at the exact same time, unlike, say, Space Jam 2: A New Legacy or the Chip and Dale movie from 2022, where they did it so much that it makes it to where it felt like it was being prioritized over the story. The movie's use of classic cartoon characters is used to enhance the story, not replace it. The scene where Eddie had to go into Toontown in order to find Jessica served a purpose to the story, in that he's under the impression that she kidnapped Roger Rabbit. Heck, in the climax of this movie, it only involves Eddie, Judge Doom, Roger, and Jessica Rabbit, while none of the other cartoon characters can be seen at all. All of them only appear near the end of the movie to see what happened to Judge Doom, and that's about it. And even though I don't have much to say about this movie,
because if I did, I would repeat myself.
The influence that this movie had on the realm of animation is really something to behold. While The Little Mermaid is the beginning of the Disney Renaissance, and the original DuckTales was the beginning of the new era where animation started being made for more than just toy sales, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, again, kickstarted the newfound interest in animation. And regardless of how hard that people tried, they were never able to recapture the integration that this movie provided to its audience. And those that fell flat on their face really did fall flat. So, when I was younger, one pastime that I really liked doing during the holidays was watching Charlie Brown specials on TV. While they were not the funniest things in the world, they were charming in their own right. However, at the exact same time, you often had to ask the question as to why Peanuts never got an animated movie at all. I mean, Garfield got a few movies, regardless of if they ended up getting critically panned. So, why not Peanuts? Something that people would probably often say until 2015, when the Peanuts did end up getting a movie, and was released by Blue Sky Studios of all companies. One of the most hit or miss studios of all time, whom didn't release anything notable in years until this movie was made. Like, to put into perspective, the last notable thing that they released until this movie was Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs, and that was back in 2009. So, to have this movie come out of nowhere, and to surpass everyone's expectations, was a sign that Blue Sky had potential for their future,
Even though that potential ended up being short-lived anyway because of Fox and Disney.
but back on point. Putting all cards on the table, the Peanuts movie is Blue Sky's best movie by a wide margin. And to really start glazing this movie, let's start off with one of this movie's best aspects, the animation. Even though Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is the movie that was what popularized the trend of having an animated movie have a 2.5D look, the Peanuts movie is the film that was what basically started the trend. There were other movies before the Peanuts movie that basically did this, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and Hotel Transylvania, for example, but those two movies were trying to bring the cartoony style into a 3D medium, rather than trying to also keep the 2D look alongside it. The Peanuts movie is just gorgeous. And what's even better than that is that some of those who worked on this movie would then go on to work on the animation for Fairly Odd Parents: A New Wish, which I might end up doing a Sean's Thoughts video on in the future, and that show is also absolutely beautiful. But back on point, one thing that this movie decides to do, which could have ended up leading to disastrous results, is that they retain the look from the original specials and comic strips while also bringing it into the realm of computer animation, because having the eyes be empty black holes while also showing the character at different angles would have made it look really uncanny. And believe me when I say that there was an animated movie like this. It's called Diary of a Wimpy Kid 2021. That movie, and by extension the sequels, looked incredibly uncanny and uncomfortable to look at because of the dotted eyes and how they got pumped out on a yearly basis, which is still happening to this day. What the Peanuts movie does to remedy this is that they specifically decide to show the character at one angle, like they do in the Peanuts specials, while also not sacrificing the CGI. While at the exact same time, this movie feels extremely atmospheric. During the parts of the movie where it's winter were my favorite moments personally. Other highlights include the school dance portions, and the scene where it's pretty gloomy after Charlie Brown found out that he accidentally signed his name on the wrong test. Although the animation is not the only thing in this movie that is worth praising. How this movie is as an adaptation to Peanuts is also worth admiring. Now, unlike with a lot of other animated movies that I reviewed so far on Sean's yearly reviews, I can understand the reason as to why this movie is broken up into different segments, rather than having the story be about one thing in specific. It's very difficult to adapt a franchise known for being in comic strips into a feature-length film without getting issues as a result. That was a problem that I also had with Little Nemo Adventures in Slumberland. It was trying to drag what was known to be a short comic strip into an entire movie, which caused the story to be a mess, and it was what presumably caused the behind-the-scenes production of that movie to have so many issues. The Peanuts movie decides to tell a few different stories over the course of its runtime, while also not losing sight of it being a movie. Also, I like the fact that unlike in the Peanuts specials, we actually get to see what the little red-haired girl actually looks like, and that they gave her a voice, which I think is best suited, because the movie is all about her moving next door to Charlie Brown, and they couldn't leave her anonymous anymore. Plus, she's not supposed to be like the adults where they communicate with wah, 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 wah. She's meant to be in the same age group as the characters that are actually shown, and you know how the title of one of the specials was called You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown? That's basically how the events of the movie goes in a nutshell. There are several sequences where Charlie Brown ends up doing a good deed for someone else, to the point where it ends up paying off. He not only helps his sister with the talent show, sacrificing his chances of impressing the little red-haired girl by not going through with doing the magic act, but he also does the book report by himself and her while she was gone for the entire weekend. Also, I like that he comes clean when he accidentally wrote his name on Peppermint Patty's test, showing that even though things don't exactly go well in his favor a lot of the time, it shows that things can go right when you do nice things for others. I'm honestly really happy with the way that this movie turned out in the end. This is the point where Blue Sky was at their peak, and they had so much potential for their future if they kept their quality at this level. So, if this is how Blue Sky was like at their peak, what was the movie that they released next? Oh no. Wander Over Yonder is a 2013 Disney animated series, and is the third animated series that Craig McCracken worked on, which, putting all cards on the table, is one of my favorite Disney animated shows of all time, and is an easy contender for the top 10 best animated series that I reviewed for Sean's Network Reviews. But at the exact same time, it's one of Disney's most underrated shows, because around the time of this show's release, it was massively overshadowed by Gravity Falls,
which is also a masterpiece in of itself.
And this show is also one of the shows that Disney trucked over the most. But before we get into all of that stuff, which is reserved for the ending of the video, what is the premise of this show? This show revolves around this orange fur creature named Wander and his blue horse companion named Sylvia. They travel the galaxy while trying to help other creatures in need, all while avoiding this Skeletor-like guy named Lord Hater and his eyeball henchmen from capturing them. And it's basically like this in the first season of the show. The second season, on the other hand, takes a bit of a different approach, where Lord Hater now has a rival named Lord Dominator, who Lord Hater has a massive crush on. Now, something to know about Wander Over Yonder is that at least in the first season, this show was a very episodic kind of series, where if something ends up happening to them in one episode, they are completely fine by the next. So, for that reason, I don't have too much to say about Wander Over Yonder in comparison to other animated shows in Sean's Network Reviews, but the things that carry Wander Over Yonder are its characters and the comedy. Wander himself is basically the SpongeBob of this show, and that he could end up being helpful to a fault. Sometimes his kindness could end up getting him either caught by one of Lord Hater's peepers, or someone could end up taking advantage of his kindness. I've seen some people who have said that Wander's obliviousness towards everything could get pretty aggravating, but I actually don't mind this, because it actually emphasizes how funny that this show could get. The Picnic is a good example of this, where he unknowingly stops Lord Hater from wishing that he could take over the galaxy, and at the exact same time, Wander is allowed to have flaws as well. He's not just a Gary Stu, like when he loses his mind in the box, and he ends up having to go through struggles of being quiet at night after Sylvia and him escape from Lord Hater's ship. Speaking of Sylvia, on the surface of things, she does seem like she's all punches and non-happiness, but at the exact same time, she does have a soft side where she does take a moment to appreciate the little things in life, part of which is thanks to Wander. In fact, if Wander and Sylvia didn't become friends, she would have ended up going into a different path entirely. The dynamic between these two is what gives this show the heart that it has. And not only does this show give us a buddy dynamic that is incredibly sweet, it also has memorable villains as well. Lord Hater, on the surface of things, is menacing, as he strikes fear into the faces of those that he takes control over, but in actuality, he is so pathetic that it's absolutely comical, to the point where Commander Peepers gets the job done more than he's willing to do. Like, there are numerous times that Lord Hater in this show is given ample opportunity to do what he wants by being able to conquer the universe, but instead, he throws it all away by giving Wander attention. Also, now that we're on the topic of this aspect of this show, Wander Over Yonder is absolutely hilarious. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that outside of Gravity Falls, Wander Over Yonder is one of Disney's funniest animated shows of all time, for a very similar reason as to what made OKKO Let's Be Heroes as funny as it is. Where the show's comedy comes from is in regards to not just the physical humor, but also in regards to its character dynamics and the reactions that come out of them. I like to believe that in regards to this show, Craig McCracken was inspired by the Looney Tunes regarding what they do in this particular show, where no matter how hard he tries, Lord Hater absolutely cannot capture Wander at all, while at the exact same time, Wander is oblivious towards what's happening to him, thinking that Lord Hater is his friend, which is where the humor thrives at. And the over-the-top type of humor from Lord Hater really helps this show as well. This show also has what you could consider as slow humor, the kind that you'd see in the Chris Savino seasons of Dexter's Lab and Powerpuff Girls, as well as Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. But I think what makes this aspect work better in Wander Over Yonder than those other shows,
Outside of it not being as frequent,
they actually build these sequences up to something rather than have a joke go on forever. I mean, have you seen what those shows have done regarding this humor?
You know, shut up. You know, shut up. You know, shut up. You know, shut up. I'm a toe pick. I'm a hot toe picker. Pick my toe, it's hot. Pick my hot toe, pick it.
Wander Over Yonder often uses this to build up to something, such as in The Box, which was definitely an episode where Wander was driven to the point of insanity, but they also use this to build up to a very funny joke in The Birthday Boy. Lord Hater's face when he finds out that the pit monster acts like a dog gets me every single time I watch this episode. Also, the episode The Cartoon is literally peak fiction.
Oh, we gotta animate a new ending where I destroy Wander. Animation is so hard! People who do this for a living deserve more credit and respect!
That's my reaction to the way that Disney treated this show during its run. Speaking of which, if Wander Over Yonder was such a good show, what exactly happened? Well, I'll tell you what happened. Wander Over Yonder was very poorly treated while it was on. In fact, it's definitely in the top 10 Disney animated shows that were poorly treated by the network/company, only ones beating it out being Nightmare Ned, Haley's on It, Teacher's Pet, and Dave the Barbarian, to the point where this is the closest that Disney has gotten to treating a show like how Nick treated Harvey Beaks and how Cartoon Network treated OKKO. Now granted, Disney didn't treat this show as bad as how Nick and Cartoon Network treated those shows while they were on, because at least Disney gave this show reruns, and they didn't leak episodes online months before they were supposed to air on TV. But the way that they decided to punish the show for a mistake that they ended up making is not just unfair, but it also feels like an act of intentional sabotage. The show first started airing on Disney Channel in September of 2013 for only 8 episodes. You want to know how long it took them to air all 8 of these episodes? It took them 4 months, mainly because they chose to air the individual segments on Friday nights. Then the show got moved over to Disney XD for a reason that admittedly also happened with their other cartoons at the time, because Disney Channel was going through an anti-animation phase for a while, until the premiere of Tangled the series in 2017. Then Disney decided to give them long and unnecessary hiatuses that were on and off again, until the first season came to an end in November 2014, proceeding in the show having yet another long hiatus. It took 9 months for the second season to finally arrive, and then after Gravity Falls came to an end, it was announced that Wander Over Yonder was ending soon. I heard that the show ended because of the fact that the show got, quote, low ratings, but from reminiscing on the show's treatment by Disney and the numerous hiatuses, it's not hard to see why this show got low ratings. And unlike Gravity Falls, where yes, that show had long hiatuses too, in fact, the hiatus between seasons 1 and 2 took nearly a full year, Alex Hirsch ended that show on his own terms. Meanwhile, Craig McCracken clearly wanted Wander Over Yonder to have a 3rd season, because even though the season 2 finale was good, it did not feel like a proper finale to the show itself. It was only a proper finale to a season, though unlike with what we got with Things Changed from Teen Titans Titans or the Inquisition from the Amazing World of Gumball, the show itself didn't end on a cliffhanger, but rather the end credits do that. Now, unlike Nick and Cartoon Network, where they had a long history with mistreating shows that weren't SpongeBob, or pretending like their more obscure shows don't exist, most of the worst treatments that were given to Disney shows were during the late 90s to the mid 2000s. Wander Over Yonder is probably the first Disney animated series during the early 2010s that got majorly trucked over, with many more to come from here. If what they ended up doing to Milo Murphy's Law, The Owl House, The Ghost and Molly McGee, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, etc. are anything to go by. But back to Wander Over Yonder. Like I said at the beginning, this show is definitely in the top 5 for all of Sean's network reviews so far. I mean, it's not as good as OKKO Let's Be Heroes, because OKKO did end up getting a proper finale, but it's very close. And it was very saddening to see it go as early as it did. But who knows? Considering the fact that Disney has been on a nostalgia streak as of late, where they've been trying to bring older shows back, including Phineas and Ferb, despite the fact that the show did have a finale. Though, like with The Amazing World of Gumball, considering the fact that they were still airing reruns of the original show's episodes as late as 2025, it was obvious that they were not gonna leave that show canned forever. Now, if only Wander Over Yonder got that luxury, given that Craig McCracken has been open to working on the newest Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home reboots, there may be a chance of Disney bringing Wander Over Yonder back for a 3rd season. But if episodes like Things Change from the original Teen Titans, or the series finale of Alpha are anything to go by, cliffhangers are the easiest way for your series to get trucked over. Raya and the Last Dragon is a 2021 Disney animated movie that was the first animated movie from the company to be released in theaters after the pandemic that happened the year before. That getting started is not good at all. Yeah, I'm not holding anything back. Raya and the Last Dragon is bad. I don't know if I'd go as far as to say that it's the worst Disney movie. I mean, Chicken Little exists, and you guys already know what I think about The Wild. And on the Pixar side of things, Brave is worse than this movie, but let me put it like this. The very first time that I watched this movie, I knew that something was extremely off about it, but I didn't know what it was at first. But then it clicked to me, and I really thought about what this movie was trying to push, and because of this aspect of the film alone, it is easily one of Disney's worst movies, by far, and that is not an exaggeration. But before we get to that aspect of the film, what is this movie about? The film revolves around a girl named Raya. After a little incident where her father trusts the other tribes of the world that they live in,
after dragons have gone nearly extinct,
it's up to Raya to find a way to get the world back to normal, all while trying to avoid someone who backstabbed her, named Mamari. And with the aid of the aforementioned last dragon named Sisu, they need to get all the pieces of this crystal gem ball back together in order to save their world. To start off this review, one of the first major issues with this movie is this movie's god-awful pacing. Not counting the end credits, which is 20 minutes, the movie in total is only an hour and 36 minutes. But the movie has as much patience as Sonic the Hedgehog, in that the movie generally feels like it's struggling to justify its runtime, so the movie is constantly jumping at every possibility to get to the next scene, which also as a result makes the writing suffer as well. In general, throughout the entire runtime of the film, the characters travel across 4 locations to get each piece of this crystal gem, and the film also has to do this while also taking into account the narrative, the characters, the writing, etc. And yet, this movie feels like it's missing a ton of scenes, and I think I know the reason why. This movie does not feel like it should have been a movie in the slightest. This feels like several episodes of a miniseries sloppily crammed into one movie. And it obviously shows. From beginning to end, it's at breakneck speed to get itself over with, which is why when we get done with the flashback in the movie, Raya is looking for Sisu. But at the exact same time, the movie still feels incomplete because the characters are not focused on properly. So it ends up leaving all of them either one-dimensional or downright pointless. Needless to say, you're not going to be seeing anyone talk about these characters in the same vein as the genie from Aladdin or Simba from The Lion King anytime soon, which makes me wonder why this wasn't an animated series instead of a movie. movie. But then when really thinking about it, I realized the reason why. This movie shares a lot of similarities to something like Avatar: The Last Airbender, right down to the title. Think about it. Characters traveling across the land with someone they think can save their world, who ends up being more of a handful than anything. Sound familiar to you guys? But at the exact same time, the film generally feels like Disney was too afraid that they'd step on Paramount's toes if they decided to make this into a series. Yet another case of Disney trying way too hard to be like someone they're not making this movie's case any better. From the very first trailer when we see Raya's child design, she looks a bit like Katara. I'd even say too much like Katara. To the point where I even said this to someone, and even they agreed with me. And accompanying Raya is a large creature that acts like a mobile ride for Raya, and said characters basically team up to take those that ruin their world down. But you see, it's different here because this movie basically shoves a message of trusting everyone down your throats. So it's like the equivalent of characters in Avatar trying to convince the Fire Nation to turn over a new leaf or join their side. In all seriousness though, if this movie had such an issue regarding in the originality and its pacing, why didn't they just go back and make a new draft of the film? Oh yeah, this movie was released at a time when the pandemic was still a thing, so never mind that then. And even disregarding this movie's massive pacing issues, the writing in general is absolutely terrible. A lot of the time, the movie switches from, "Oh my goodness, we shouldn't trust these people, they'd backstab you at any moment," to a freaking episode of Season 5 of Steven Universe. I'm not even joking. The movie shows one of its characters, Namari,
Don't worry, I'll get to the many problematic things about her in just a bit,
as being extremely hostile and unhinged, specifically around Raya, and then after the most infuriating sequence where she kills Sisu for the most contrived and baffling thing that I've ever seen on screen, and then guilt trips Raya for her trust issues, the film all of a sudden wants us to see her as good now, after she tried to kill Raya on multiple occasions? Are you serious, movie? And there's absolutely no transition between all the tribes hating each other to them getting along now. This didn't happen because Raya and those she befriended trust each other now. They like each other now because the plot demands it. And the film is absolutely obsessed with this message of trust. But the movie on several different occasions shoots itself in the foot regarding its message to the point of being a generally harmful thing to teach for reasons I'll get to later. And the message generally falls flat because of what is shown on screen in these sequences. And they don't really think about the general implications behind what they're teaching. They teach the message of making the first move of trusting someone, but the movie doesn't question is if there are people out there that could use you, if the trust that the movie is trying to push is one-sided and the other is trying to backstab you. That definitely does not look good on this movie's part. Yes, I understand that this is an animated movie. The people in this movie are not gonna be like how people are like in the real world. But this movie is being 100% serious when it comes to this message, all while trying to sugarcoat it. That is what I feel is the worst aspect of the film, which I'll be getting to later. Weird how people only really seem to hyper-focus on Sisu, when the actual message does a lot more harm to the film than her. Speaking of which, if there is a specific criticism about this movie that I do believe is blown way out of proportion, it's definitely Sisu. I still don't like her for reasons that I'll be getting to in a little bit, but I wouldn't really say that she downright ruins the movie or anything like that, because Sisu is not really that obnoxious. It's kind of like how a lot of people hate Olaf from Frozen, despite the fact that he doesn't really do all that much in the movies that warrant the hate that he gets. I don't know, but it's probably just me. It can take a lot out of me to get me annoyed with something or someone. The issue that I have with Sisu instead is that she kind of feels like the people behind the movie were trying to make their own version of the genie from Aladdin, from the fact that Sisu is a powerful creature that aids the main character on their journey, and that she makes a bunch of wisecracks throughout the movie, and tries to give the main character advice that they don't really take into mind. However, here's the problem. What made the genie from Aladdin a beloved character was that not only was he useful to the plot, but also the genie was, and here's the big twist, funny? Sisu in this movie is just there, and she really doesn't say or do anything thought-provoking at all, other than hammering home this movie's horrible message,
which I'll get to.
But in a weird way, she serves the most and the least purpose out of all the characters in this movie. She's not a character, she's a plot device. Essentially, she's just a scrappy do. A character that throws herself into situations and brings others into said situations with her. A primary example of this in the movie is when she directly gets off the boat that Raya and the others were on, and runs off to give a gift to the Spine Tribe, getting herself and Raya captured in the process. And that's another thing that I don't like about her as well. She treats the situation like this is just an easy conflict clearing solution, when no, this is a serious matter. The way that she treats this situation is just ridiculous. She believes that in order for peace and harmony to be restored among all of these tribes, is to just give them a gift and then, oh my goodness, this is so cool, I want to be friends with you forever. I get that she was asleep for a million years, and so she doesn't know how these tribes have acted since all of them have drifted apart, but what does Sisu think that this is? Just an episode of Dora the Explorer or the Care Bears? This is just embarrassing. And as for the other characters, not a single one of them even stood out to me at all, except for the main characters and Namari, obviously. The only one in which I do sympathize with is Raya, because she got all of this piled onto her for no reason, even as early as the beginning of the film. Yes, she trusted Namari, but the film shows that she was a child, and Raya's father,
In a very stupid and irresponsible way, might I add,
decided to blindly trust the other tribes to begin with, thus encouraging Raya to trust Namari. So I don't see how in any way this is Raya's fault. Children don't know any better. They don't have that much of a full grasp on the world around them yet, nor do they know about the concept of manipulation. It's Raya's father that is more to blame than Raya, because he stupidly decided to trust the other tribes despite knowing that they tried to get their hands on the crystal. Speaking of the other characters, I find them either very pointless or downright repulsive. Thinking back to previous Disney movies real quick, it honestly amazes me how a movie like The Lion King, which had a ton of important characters, surpassing this movie in quantity, are more memorable in their personality than this movie is. I can't think of any other character traits for these three other than kid that tries to be charming but is just embarrassing himself, a baby that is a thief, and the strong muscular guy. These three have next to no use in the plot. The baby is stealthy, which leads to sequences where she's sneaking around and is a good distractor while her monkey friends steal things for her, but the other two are just there because the movie needs the kid as he could control the boat, while the muscular guy is strong and that's all you get. But all of what I said about this movie pales in comparison to the worst aspect of it, and that is the fact that this movie's view on morality, as well as the message of the film, disgust me on every single fundamental level imaginable. I could look past the fact that the writing is very bad, and I could also ignore how this movie desperately wants to be the next Avatar: The Last Airbender,
because a lot of animated films I reviewed so far had these issues.
but the movie blatantly telling its audience, as well as Raya, to trust others no matter what they did, personally rubs me in such a wrong way that it immediately takes away any sort of redemption that this movie could have had. Usually, I don't like to get onto any sort of TV show or movie for having a bad message, especially after the age where critics would often attack those who made the products, especially if the show or movie is not supposed to be taken that seriously. SpongeBob and Teen Titans Go are examples of this, where you could debate about it having lessons that aren't supposed to be taken seriously, despite the fact that the latter show is aimed at an impressionable audience, but for things that are straightforward with what it's teaching, like shows that are serious with their morals, TV shows, or something that is clearly supposed to be taken seriously, that's when it becomes a problem. We have another Ivan the Incredible situation on our hands is what I'm saying. For one thing, this movie has the exact same level of morality and redeeming behavior as Steven Universe. But give Steven Universe some credit. That show, you could argue, was not intentionally trying to redeem those that did something bad. The show was probably intending to say that the Diamonds were naive or clueless to what happened to Pink Diamond, which was why all of the events of that show happened in the first place. This movie, on the other hand, is saying out loud that you should trust those that did something bad because they want to make things up to you. Remember how back during my review on Middle School Moguls, when I said that the final episode's message of stealing was okay because you were were doing it for a good cause was atrocious, well, that's the problem with this movie. This is not only a horrible thing to say to children, because children are impressionable, but this is also a horrible message for adults as well. Because not only does it give off the impression that the movie is telling abuse victims to trust their abusers because they want to make up for what they did, but what this movie is implying as well is that the person who did all of these things that caused the world to get destroyed is not the one who should learn a lesson. The film is implying that the victim is the one who should learn a lesson. As the movie constantly gets onto Raya for having trust issues, despite the fact that she is in her right to have trust issues after what happened to her as a freaking child, but also, the movie shows the many reasons as to why Raya is not wrong for having trust issues, especially given the one sequence where the Chief of Talon was about to let Sisu get turned into a statue if she didn't hand over the pieces of the gem. And there are several sequences that contradicts what this movie is trying to go for. And the movie already shot itself in the foot, because the movie implies and shows that Namari is not trustworthy. And what the movie is basically doing could be considered victim blaming. Because Raya is the one who was affected the most, as the other tribes were the ones who got Raya's father turned into a statue. And because she was so psychologically damaged at a young age, she should not be the one who has to learn this lesson. And if the movie really wanted us to believe that Raya is being unreasonable with Namari and everyone else, maybe you shouldn't show sequences where characters are stabbing each other in the back, because it makes it seem like the movie is saying that Raya shouldn't have trust issues despite what she went through. And you should also not have a sequence where Namari is about to shoot Sisu, especially given that she was going to shoot Sisu anyway, because that's what that shot implies. Don't put focus on a shot where Namari is putting her finger on the trigger, because it implies that she was going to kill Sisu even if Raya didn't try to stop her. And then later on, when Raya directly confronts Namari, she deflects the blame onto Raya, saying, "It's your fault just as much as it is my fault," and then guilt-tripping Raya into believing that she didn't trust Sisu. Excuse me? You literally had your finger on the trigger! Of course Raya was not going to freaking trust you, and she trusted Sisu because she knew that Sisu was not going to stab her in the back! And by the way, no, Namari does not get any sort of consequences in the slightest for anything she did throughout the movie, nor does she even apologize for any of this, even though everyone in Fang starting to get turned into statues was her fault in the first place. And the only reason why she and by extension the rest of the tribes come together at the end of the film is because the plot demands it. And the only reason why she decided to come together with Raya and the other characters is because the plot also demands it. It's a jarring tonal shift to have her getting all fierce and fighting with Raya, only to go all like, "Oh, I trust you now, to the point where I'm going to stay and put the gem back together." For the love of God, Angus Scattergood from Rock Dog at least learned his lesson at the end of his movie. Same thing for Buck Cluck from Chicken Little. Here, we get nothing. And by the way, I know what people are going to say. "Oh, this one problem should not get in the way of the entire movie. Maybe you should look at the other parts and not say it's bad because of this." I got this exact same defense whenever I said that I didn't like Robot Boy. People defended that show because of Tommy, Lola, and Robot Boy, despite the fact that there are other problems with that show, even putting aside the other characters I dislike. With Raya and the Last Dragon, it's extremely hard to do this because this movie shoves this one message down the audience's throats to the point where the movie feels like it was written for preschoolers. That's how forced that this movie's message is hammered into the audience, to the point where this honestly feels like a long episode of Captain Planet because of how unsubtle this movie is.
Protect the environment, or I'll kill you, Captain Planet!
At least that show was doing what it was doing for a good cause, that being to keep the environment safe. This movie, again, is hammering in a message that is genuinely harmful to teach anybody of any age, especially if you're someone who dealt with a manipulator or an abuser. To give this movie every benefit of the doubt that I possibly can, maybe it's not intentionally trying to tell its viewers to trust everyone, because, you know, trusting someone is a good thing to encourage if someone is trying to help you. As someone who used to reject any and all criticisms flung my way, it's a good thing to trust those that try to help you. But when it comes to situations like what Raya goes through in this movie, where someone stabs you in the back and continues to show this exact same behavior for many months or years on end, that's the problem with this movie. The implications speak louder than what it's intending. And so to have this movie imply that you should just blindly trust other people, especially if they did something abhorrent to you that took a massive effect on your mental health, that personally strikes a nerve within me, and desecrates every single positive that I could have with it. Which, getting on to that aspect real quick, there are two positives that I will give this movie that keep it away from being completely awful, in the same vein as either Brave or The Wild. As standard for any Disney movie, I will say that the animation in this movie is very beautiful, as well as atmospheric, and I like how the other tribes look. And the movie put a lot of effort into the world building, where the entire map's ocean is shaped exactly like a dragon, and how all the other tribes don't look exactly the same. And the movie itself does try to go into a different kind of style than what we're used to Disney using, and admittedly, what got me looking forward to this movie is the martial arts angle that we've seen in the trailers, because Disney didn't really do this beforehand. The closest that we've ever gone with this is Mulan, but that film is more focused on war than it is on martial arts. But that is a movie that I'd rather be watching than this. And besides, all of the positives that this movie could have gotten to salvage it is moot at this point. Some of Disney's most infamous movies, like The Black Cauldron and Home on the Range, have good animation, but are movies that the company wants to forget about. And the world-building aspect does not save this movie. Good ideas cannot save a bad product, as I've learned from Ollie's Pack. So overall, as I stated just a little bit ago, while I don't believe that Raya and the Last Dragon is the worst of the Disney or Pixar movies, because I could have seen this movie working, as opposed to Brave or The Wild, which are clones of past Disney and Pixar movies, I humbly believe that it's one of their worst. Yes, I'd even take Home on the Range over this movie. Home on the Range is obnoxious and has dislikable characters, and it's a movie that is only aimed at children, not everyone of all ages, but that movie is harmless, and I doubt that children will take notes that would potentially harm them from that movie. Raya and the Last Dragon genuinely does this in every single way, and it's not a movie that I would recommend to children or even adults. Heck, I'd even take the 2021 Tom and Jerry movie over this, because outside of Kayla, that movie is also harmless. Raya and the Last Dragon is an appropriate title, admittedly, because not only is Sisu the Last Dragon in this movie, but this is the last animated movie from 2021 that I'll be watching ever again. The Phantom Tollbooth is a 1970 MGM animated movie that is the first Chuck Jones animated movie to be produced after Chuck Jones got fired from Warner Brothers, and is based on the 1961 novel of the same name, which, to be as honest as I can, is just alright. A little fun fact about this movie before I get into the feature itself: back in 2023, when I was organizing my binge list for this series, I was actually initially planning on reviewing this movie after I took a look at Leap, but this movie ended up being put to the side on my binge list due to the fact that I was more interested in watching the 2017 MLP movie, and even that was put to the side due to the fact that I watched the Rodfellows movie with someone,
that being Lady Sega Genesis.
Then I watched the Polar Express with my mom on Christmas Eve, and I needed to watch the 2021 Tom and Jerry movie quickly because it was expiring on Tubi. And to be completely honest, I'm kind of glad that I ended up putting this review to the side, as well as putting it to the side on my binge list, because to be honest, I don't have a lot to really say about this movie. What is this movie about? The film revolves around a kid named Milo. One day he got extremely bored while he was walking home from school, for a reason that is never really explained, until he comes across a strange gift box in his own room that just so happened to be a toll booth, which is what the movie is titled after, which leads him into another world that is in need of being cleaned up due to the fact that two kings are on bad terms with each other, and rhyme and reason are basically locked away, but not really. To start off this review, I'm gonna begin with getting into the problems that I have with this movie. I know that I've gotten onto other movies in Sean's yearly reviews for their pacing issues due to the rushed nature of the movie, whether if it's with the Teacher's Pet movie or Cats Don't Dance, but the writing in this movie is pretty undercooked, where most of the beginning of the film is taken up by the beginning credits with Milo walking home, and as soon as Milo gets home, after he has a chat with a friend on the phone, we're thrown into what the movie is actually about, which is in regards to Milo traveling to another world, no build-up whatsoever, or even establishing Milo's supposed family that he might have. Most of the film is set in the Phantom Tollbooth world, where Milo comes across a bunch of new characters, the characters sing a song, and then we move on to the next scene. Kind of like in The Wizard of Oz, but only animated. And also, I'm pretty sure that The Wizard of Oz did establish characters and what the main protagonist was going through, and Alice in Wonderland did establish the theme of the main character not wanting to grow up. The only thing that they establish about Milo in this movie is that he was bored, although the Phantom Tollbooth seems to also be sentient or a game, because it also flew into Milo's friend's house in this movie, and a lot of the characters that Milo comes across in the Phantom Tollbooth are very one-note and one-dimensional, like the dog character as well as that giant blue grasshopper character, and they just kind of go through the motions. Like, Milo seems to not really go through any sort of conflict in the movie, except for the moment where he accidentally messed up the sky, but that was more because of peer pressure, and the song numbers are also pretty forgettable as well. Two songs literally just have the number and letter king sing about words and numbers, one song has the scientist sing about how much he loves noise, and one song has Milo singing about being lazy, but those are the only songs that I remember off the top of my head. Though, with me getting all of my issues out there in regards to the film, are there any positives that I have with this movie? Yes. Although, considering the last movie that I sat through in production order for Sean's yearly reviews, we'd be able to go nowhere else but up from here, unless I end up coming across other nasty surprises in this series or when I get to season 2. For example, the animation in this movie is absolutely stellar by 1960 standards. This movie was done by Chuck Jones after all, whom also had his fingerprints on the Tom and Jerry shorts that were directed by him, and it's honestly bewildering to me that in spite of the fact that this movie was produced in the 1960s, this movie has much better production values than the Ryan's World movie, which is honestly kind of baffling. Also, the puns that the guy that Milo meets while he was in this world were very clever, and while the film is pretty undercooked regarding the narrative, there were other things that I did enjoy about this movie, such as that police officer character that basically acted like a judge, basically saying that Milo is guilty. And while Milo is just kind of bland in this movie, he's at least a much better protagonist than the one from the last episode in production order. But yeah, like I said at the beginning, because I don't have all that much to say about this movie, I might as well end the review by saying that if you do want to watch an animated film that is purely meant to be for fun, in the same vein as either The Wizard of Oz or Alice in Wonderland, this would be a nice choice to go with. You may not like this one as much as those other two, but you'll have a decent time with this one. And after sitting through the Ryan's World movie, there was nowhere else to go here than up anyway, and we'll be going up even more, especially when it comes to the next review.